Is it a bad sign if somebody who's running for president of the United States doesn't know that China's had nuclear weapons for almost 50 years? Is that bad or good or why?
A red flag for some voters. Yes.
Could you imagine? We're gonna play a clip. Herman Cain, actually, and everybody's focused on the sexual harassment charges, and the woman wants to talk, and we're gonna get to that in a second. But it seems to me, Willie, it's far more disturbing that the guy who wants to be commander-in-chief. Again, far more disturbing now from what we know. Obviously, if he sexually harassed two women, that's very disturbing. But the fact that a guy wants to be commander-in-chief does not know, and we know he'll backtrack today, because once again, he's showing his ignorance in foreign policy, and then he backtracks, says it's a joke. But he didn't know when he was on PBS that China had nuclear weapons. He said, we know they're trying to acquire nuclear technology. Can you imagine, Willie, what would happen if Sarah Palin had made this sort of mistake? And why is it that people like Sarah Palin get absolutely destroyed, as most Democratic candidates would, and yet Herman Cain makes these mistakes one day after another, and he just keeps sailing through?
And there seems to be a sort of point of pride for him. Remember when he did the use Becky stand line, and he talked about right of return, those kind of things. He said, look, I don't need to know those things. I'll have advisors. There'll be people around me who know them. I don't need to know that. So it seems to be an odd source of pride for him that he's not familiar with what's happening in the world around him.
It is really amazing, and these are some of the most important issues of right of return. Andrea Mitchell, right of return, whether China has nuclear weapons or not, they've been in the club since '64. It's not like, they're not Pakistan. They didn't sneak it in.
The reason why Henry Kissinger sneaked over there in 1972 to set up normalization.
So let's play this clip, and then I'd love to get your response to it.
I do view China as a potential military threat to the United States.
And what could you do as president to head that off?
My China strategy is quite simply outgrow China. I plan to get away from making cutting our defense a priority and make investing in our military capability a priority, going back to my statement, peace through strength and clarity. So yes, they're a military threat. They've indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear capability, and they want to develop more aircraft carriers like we have. So yes, we have to consider them a military threat.
They've indicated that they're trying to develop nuclear technology. I didn't see a smile on his face, so when he comes out and says it was a joke.
Peace through strength, though.
Peace through strength. Slogans, great sloganeering. But that is stunning. That, too, would seem to be a disqualifier. But Herman Cain, and the reason we're bringing this, we're not picking on Herman Cain. We'd be saying this of any Democrat or Republican who is at the top of the field who did not know that nuclear weapons have been in the hands of the Chinese for 50 years.
The most extraordinary thing is that he is at the top of the field in some polls, and certainly the intensity factor out in Iowa in the caucus poll, where he really is lapping Mitt Romney in terms of committed caucus goers. It's extraordinary. It says something about the way this whole campaign has evolved. It says something about us, frankly, in the media. And also, obviously, the domestic focus, the appropriate domestic focus on our economy, at the same time as there are certain, basic foreign policy credentials that you've got to have if you're going to be president.
And yet, if you look at the Washington Post today, Michael Steele, Iowa supporters rallying around him. He's 1 point behind Mitt Romney in a Florida poll that we're going to be showing in a minute. He is right now. You would have to put him as the front runner for the GOP, and yet
no doubt about that.
He is woefully ill-prepared to be commander-in-chief.
I think at this point what Herman needs to do is to step off the media stage. I think he needs to hunker down with a core team of advisors to get the messaging right, to get boned up on what will now be some serious questions in the foreign policy area, because there's a foreign policy debate that's coming up soon. So there are some things that he needs to start doing.
You say he needs to start doing it, but it's not hurting him in the polls.
It's not hurting him in the polls, but everything has a shelf life. Everything has a shelf life. And so it's not just about, at this point, your base who's going to be with you in Iowa. It's about what happens after that when the broader electorate is looking at you and considering you for the presidency of the United States. You want to make sure you have a good conversation with them, not just with the folks who are sitting there who are rallying around you because you're being attacked by the liberal media, but more importantly, that you're saying things that resonate beyond that base. And right now, that resonance is not not really clicking with a lot of people.
I mean, aren't we? That sort of is a disturbing thing to say, though, because what we're saying essentially is that he should take some time and learn these issues so that he can cover up his prior ignorance of them. We want to select a presidential candidate who comes into this process with that knowledge already intact. We don't want.
But
someone,
that's not the case for everybody who walks into this.
Well, I would like to assume that. I would like to assume that for an election to the presidency, the process would produce people who actually do have that knowledge.
But Sam, he doesn't have that knowledge.
I know, but the solution is not to take some time, go off and study these issues.
Well,
as much as that'd be great.
The solution is to finish selling your books and get off the presidential trail and come back when you're ready.
And that's what the most alarming thing is, for me at least, is that it does seem like here is a man who went on this presidential quest, in large part to sell books, and has found himself as a front runner and a very, someone who has a lot of enthusiasm behind him in Iowa. And we need to really look at the primary processes that this could happen. I think that's a little troubling.
Think about this. Andrea, you were reporting throughout the 2008 campaign about Sarah Palin. And Sarah Palin, remember, she had that Charlie Gibson interview. She talked about the Bush Doctrine. And there was a big debate whether she knew what the Bush Doctrine was. I thought at the time that she actually had gotten it right. But we had that debate. Was she ignorant of what the Bush Doctrine was? And it was a big debate, and Sarah Palin, many people wrote articles. James Fallows wrote an article just saying she was too dumb, basically, to be vice president, too ignorant. But she looks like Avril Harriman compared to Herman Cain, and I mean it. She seems, Sarah Palin could absolutely take down Herman Cain in a foreign policy Jeopardy contest right now. And yet, for some reason, Herman Cain is not being held to the same tough standard as Sarah Palin. Forget Democrats and Republicans.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Sarah Palin would have been massacred by the national media, and I just don't know why Herman Cain is getting a free walk, not only by the national media, but by Republicans, by the Republican base. Why?
He's been very engaging. He's got a great personality.
So does Sarah Palin.
Granted. But he's getting a pass. And the questions aren't being asked. And maybe it is because 999, as simplistic as it is, was a great slogan. It was a great bumper sticker for people hungering for some economic solution. And people haven't been focused on Uzbek.
I think Andrea's right there. I think the focus has been on the economy. There has not been the national discussion on international affairs and foreign affairs that would cause people to focus their view on actually what he's saying and does he really understand the intricacies here. That's a big part of it.
Isn't part of it that sort of in the back of everyone's mind we sort of think that, okay, this guy's going to eventually go away at some point. These poll numbers are soft and that he will no longer be the front runner in Iowa. And why, jump
I wouldn't count on that.
At this point, maybe not. But for the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at this rise and been like, well, there's really not much there, and everyone else has fallen back to earth, so will Herman Cain. What's the point of getting ourselves worked up and criticizing the man? But now it's getting a little more serious.
Willie Geist, I've got to say, seriously, day in and day out, the longer Herman Cain's in first place, the subtext of this story is Mitt Romney. Is the fact that the conservative base does not trust Mitt Romney. I think what he did last week in Ohio, I will say it again, and I will say it again, because it resonated with the conservative base, his flip-flop on whether he was going to support John Kasich or not, and Kasich's union reforms are, quote, anti-union legislation. Is devastating for Mitt Romney. And if you look at this Florida poll, here Mitt Romney was supposed to win Florida back in 2008. The latest Suffolk University poll regarding Florida shows Herman Cain and Mitt Romney in a statistical tie in the state of Florida, and everybody else way back, Newt Gingrich, Rick Perry, Ron Paul. The polls also show many other things, but Barack Obama's approval rating in Florida right now, Willie, is at 41%. This is a state that would be so easy for the Republican Party to take, but right now, the party's in search of itself. It does not have a conservative stalwart to get behind that can win the general election. Isn't that what these rises and falls and fluctuations of all these conservative candidates really means?
To your point, if you look inside those state-by-state polls, among self-identified conservatives, they're going for Herman Cain. If you look at Florida, if you look at Iowa, if you even look at the state of Texas, where Herman Cain's polling neck and neck with Rick Perry in the state where he's the governor, conservatives are going for Herman Cain in a way that they're certainly not going for Mitt Romney. That's a problem he's going to have to address, and the longer Herman Cain stays around, the more they're going to have to start worrying about Herman Cain. I think Sam's right. Even the Romney campaign sort of sat back and said, this guy's going to go away, he's going to implode, but he hasn't done it. We've been saying that for several weeks, and he's still sitting there on top of the polls.
He is. At the end of the day, though, when we've been talking about this a couple of days, this is such a searing indictment of Mitt Romney. Conservatives don't trust him. Yeah. And I don't think they ever will.
He's got a real drag within the conservative community. They do not have that love for him that they've shown to others. Now, the question becomes, if a Herman Cain's balloon begins to deflate, is there someone there to replace him, a Newt Gingrich or someone like that? I don't know. But at some point, there's got to be a coming to the head of this relationship between the Mitt Romney world and the conservative world, because Iowa is 2 months out and the voting will start. And that's when it's organization on the ground and the money matters and all those things come into play.
You know, Andrea, I'm hearing something remarkable over the past week. I'm hearing conservatives, stalwart conservatives, starting to say, you know what? I would rather lose to Barack Obama. And I would rather give him 4 more years than elect Mitt Romney and have him spend money like George Bush and have another Republican who promises to be conservative go liberal. Conservative leaders this week, it's like a light switch has come on, and they say, you know what? Fine, we would rather lose.
Well, you know what was telling for me was George Will's column on Sunday, which just eviscerated Mitt Romney, who he knows very well.
George Will has made that decision. You read that column, George Will, like a lot of other conservative leaders, have made the, Rick Perry, he may not be qualified to be president, but he would rather support Rick Perry than have Mitt Romney.
If Cain implodes, who is the next conservative who could it be Newt Gingrich? I would suggest that he has so many flaws from his record that would be a hard sell. Is there a scenario, and you know the rules far better than anyone, Michael, under these new rules where they're not all winner take all, is there some sort of scenario where at the end of the day there could be not a brokered convention per se, but could a Jeb Bush come into it or someone else at the end of the day?
You're going to have a scenario where you could have 2, maybe 3 people going into the convention with close in the numbers and the delegate numbers. But I think what would happen in that situation is that the pressure would be on to really gravitate to one of those folks. To have a 4th person come out of the blue or a 3rd person come out of the blue and get the nomination would just upheave the whole thing, because then you're having a conversation about a Jeb Bush coming in August to run for the presidency in November. And it's
not a bad deal.
Not a bad
You're Jeb Bush, not a bad deal. And let me tell you something.
Only 3 debates?
The rejoicing you would hear would be from conservatives who would absolutely.
Jeb Bush would be a dynamic.
Love having Jeb Bush.
Just incredible.
But I don't know that that's going to happen. But you look, Newt Gingrich. Newt is showing an upsurge. And I don't even think, though, it's Newt's past that has hurt him so much. It's that he's been so erratic in this campaign. If Newt had made the decision early on to play the grown-up that he's been in the past, at critical times, he'd be doing much better than he is right now.
He came out and stumbled, but I have to give him credit. He has managed to be consistent and to show himself capable of standing in there and sort of
and he's living off
the debate.
The land and doing it without the staff.
Exactly.
Guess who lived off the land 4 years ago?
Yeah.
John McCain. After his campaign imploded. Sam Stein, another guy, Ron Paul. Ron sits there stubbornly with 8, 9, 10%. As we get closer, I think you may see more protest votes going to Ron Paul, who may inch up there as well.
And Ron Paul has sort of had that corner of the party for a while now, and it's basically stayed around 10 to 12%, like you said. We talked a little bit offset about what role, if any, Huntsman could play in sort of coming up and seizing some of that anti-Romney sentiment. And I think I'm in agreement with you guys when I think if he's going to do it, he has to present himself as different than what he's been doing so far, which is as the moderate in the field, or he's defined himself by what he is against Republicans for. And I think you're starting to see his advisors present him again as the only true conservative alternative to Romney. Also, Huntsman's been taking some of the more sharper jabs at Mitt Romney among everyone else in the field, and you get a sense that he realizes his opportunities right now.